Which class are you here with? You're in my class. Pelican? Okay, Pelican is this side. We're filling up this center portion. Nicole? Who are you here with? Oh, yeah. Yes, she is signed up for this. I'm going to take this out right now. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming to support my events.
Wow, even Elizabeth.
On this side right now. This is the lunch section. But it's Miss Lund is Nicole right now, so she said, "Come if you want."
Okay.
Yeah, it's sure. Yeah, 8 and 16, all right? Yeah. Yes, that would be perfect. This is just our swinging side. On. Perfect. So down. Hello to all of our folks on the left.
Dr. Turner. Yesterday, another horrific shooting occurred at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, where 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. While those shootings
right, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to the E-Block panel for Civics Day. Next Gen Voices put this together, so yeah, and basically we really thought that it was important to bring in school committee members to talk to all the student body today, because obviously their work really pertains to life here at Newton North, and I think it's very important, and we all think it's very important to know more about what they do, how the policy process works, and also how to get involved in the work that they do as well. Okay. My name is Rachel Verwisnia. I'm a senior at Newton North, and I use she, her, hers pronouns.
Hi, I'm Grace Carrot. I'm a sophomore, and I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Haruka. I'm a junior, and I also use she, her pronouns. So, if we want to just get started with introductions, I was just going to kind of let you guys introduce yourselves, and then maybe what ward you're from, and then anything else you want to add, pronouns as well.
Sure. My name is Chris Bresky. I have lived in West Newton for 8 years now. I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. I am the school committee rep from Ward 2, which is basically centered on Newtonville. We're in Ward 2 right now. And this is my first term as a school committee member.
Hi everybody, I'm Kathy Shields. I've been on the school committee for 5 years, so this is my 5th year. I'm the Ward 7 school committee rep, which is sort of the eastern side of Newton, sort of Newton Center. My kids are at Ward Elementary and at Bigelow Middle School, and one will be here next year. I use she, her pronouns, and so I've lived in Newton overall for about 16 years, both in Newtonville, but for the last 12 in Newton Center.
Hello everyone, thank you for the invite. It's nice to be here. I'm Reggie Parlikar. I am 4.5 months into my time with the school committee. So elected last year, started in January. I live in Normanton, the lake, and have been in Newton since '94. So it's been a while. And I have a son who is a junior here at Newton North, and I use he, his pronouns. Thank you.
And I'm Toby Romer. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education for the Newton Public Schools. So I'm not a school committee member, but I'm one of many staff people who regularly attend school committee meetings and present to the school committee, as well as lots of other responsibilities in helping run the Newton Public Schools. Basically, I'm the supervisor and support both high schools and the 4 middle schools. I've worked in Newton as assistant superintendent for secondary education. This is my 7th year, and I've been a teacher, school administrator, high school principal prior to that, and I use he and pronouns, and happy to be here. And I can kind of explain some of the context for the work of the school committee members from the point of view of Newton Public School staff members throughout the panel.
Okay, so our first question is just like, what are school committee meetings, and then what do you do in them, and also what does your role entail kind of outside of the meetings as well? So if you want, you can start with anyone, I guess.
It sounds like those are 3 questions, so why don't I take what are school committee meetings and then invest into the other questions? Does that sound good? So, okay. All right, so the school committee, we wait, is there a large meeting? I'll repeat my introduction very quickly, and then we're going to move on to the topic of what we do in school committee meetings. I'm Kathy Shields. I'm the Ward 7 representative on the school committee, and this is my 5th year. So our questioners asked us to address what happens, sort of what are school committee meetings. So the school committee is an elected public body of the city of Newton. We're governed by something called the open meeting law, which means we need to do all of our discussing and deliberating of topics in public. So the way we do that is by having open meetings. They're roughly every 2 weeks during the school year. We meet most weeks on Monday nights at 7 p.m. We've been meeting this year on Zoom, and so that anybody who wants to can log on to our meetings and listen. In past years, we had our meetings at the Ed Center, and so you could come in person and talk to us. Our meetings are also recorded and broadcast on New TV, and those meeting recordings are archived, so you can go back and listen to any past school committee meeting you'd like to. The meetings typically last about 2 hours, although some are longer, some are shorter, and we publish an agenda the Thursday before our Monday meeting, which covers the list of topics and an approximation of at what time we'll address each topic. So you want to do the next question?
No, this was a three-parter, or what for the other?
Kind of what is your role in the school committee meetings, and then what do you kind of have to do outside of the meetings as well to prepare?
Absolutely. So the school committee is made up of 9 members. It's 1 representative from each of the wards in Newton, as well as the mayor. And collectively, as Kathy said, we receive the material for Monday's meeting by Thursday, sometimes earlier. What we have to do is go through that material, be ready with questions, essentially prep for the meeting ahead of time. The other important part of being in the meeting is really to ask questions. So Toby or other senior members of the administration, Principal Turner, anyone else comes to present on a topic, we need to think ahead of time about what we'd be asking them, what we want to understand better, based on what the topic is. Some of the topics are very detailed. We just went through a budget process where we were digging very deep into what was being spent by NPS, on what, was it effective, etc. Some are broader. This Monday we had a DEI presentation which covered work that's being done across the district. But regardless of the topic, you have to be prepared. You have to read through the material. Sometimes you send questions ahead of time to the people who will be presenting so that you don't surprise them, that they're ready to cover whatever questions you have. So that's much of what we do in the meetings. The one other important thing, Kathy referred to open meeting laws. We have to let the public know ahead of time if we're going to be voting on something. And very often something is presented, an item is presented in one meeting, and then we vote on it in the following meeting. Giving time for a presentation for the public to weigh in. We'll get to that, I'm sure, with another question. And I'm going to hand off to Chris about what we do outside of the meetings, because there is quite a bit.
Yeah, so the issue of open meeting law comes up a lot outside meetings. So technically the rule is that there's 9 members, and we are a majority quorum, so 5 members cannot meet and discuss substantially an issue under our jurisdiction outside the meeting. That is, it exists for a very good reason. It's a transparency law, and it exists in a lot of jurisdictions around the country. It's a Massachusetts state law. It is also, as a member, extraordinarily and incredibly frustrating that, we have these issues that, we can sort of, we might know, I think I know where Rajiv might stand on that, Kathy might stand on that, maybe I have a conversation, one, not the other, oh, shoot, I just talked to 3 other people, now I can't talk to anyone else. Literally, that's kind of how it works. So you can imagine how difficult that gets in terms of, hey, I've got a really strong view on this, and I want to try to build some consensus around this. you can never walk into a meeting knowing if you've got that fifth vote. And, you know, we've had some issues, one very recently, that was down to an abstention as to whether or not something moved forward. So it's, it's sort of a necessary thing, but from our perspective, it's almost a bit of a necessary evil in the sense that it makes the work harder. It makes it more frustrating. It makes it tougher to get things done outside the meeting. And as Rajiv said, we'll be, I don't know, I'm guessing you guys are probably in the same ballpark, and must have spent 100 hours reviewing budget items through the course of that process. And look, we're all volunteers. There's, well, the mayor, it's the mayor, but the other 8 of us, we have jobs, we have lives, we have kids. It's, that gets very difficult to manage.
Over the live stream, your microphone seems to be working really well, but we can't really hear the microphone. Okay. So if you want to pass that one, maybe. Just the audio and then pass it. Okay. Here, just one section on the one.
Okay, sure.
I could add a couple of the other things we do outside of meetings. So outside of meetings, we also, while we are each school committee members, and a big part of our role is how we participate in our open meetings, we each have assignments that derive from us being school committee members that we take on in addition to our open meeting work. One good example is that there are a number of school building committees operating right now, and every member of the school committee serves on a school building committee. And so those meetings happen, depends on the particular committee and the particular stage of the project, but once a month or so. We also serve as liaisons to other groups within Newton. There is for example, a special education parents advisory council, and so we attend those meetings sometimes. There's a youth commission that Rachel is a member of. I serve as the liaison to the youth commission. And we each have our own sort of subgroup assignments that we do as school committee members that are in addition to our regular meeting work. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about some of those roles that you've done.
Yeah, so I think all of us sit on a building committee. I'm on the Horace Mann Building Committee. I work in our finance and audit advisory with the city council. I work in our sort of communications working group, which we're really trying to improve the manner in which we communicate with the community. And then there's there's sort of constituent work. We get dozens of emails. I'll say substantial emails a week. We get hundreds or thousands of form emails per week. But there's people who come to you with very individual circumstances, and they're looking for someone to give them an answer. And then that's by and large, we may not have it. More often than not, we're probably pointing them in the right direction, and telling them go bother Toby. But that's a huge part of it as well.
So I personally am on the Lincoln Elliot School Building Committee. Some of you may have attended Lincoln Elliot, possibly. We will have a wonderful new school there that's going to go up over the next few years. So being involved in that requires talking to the architects, seeing presentations about the layout of the school, the layout of the grounds, what it will look like, if it matches the requirements from teachers, just being able to facilitate some of that. I'd like to actually cover also the point that Chris did around outreach. So we get a bunch of emails each week. Some of the forum emails aren't as effective because it's the exact same email signed by different people, and you get 100 of them. But the ones that are individual, that say, here's an issue that I have or a concern that I have, that the person sending the email has clearly written themselves, gets more attention, and I would speak for all of us and say we read all of those emails and we try and respond to them. Questions can range from something it's very much the responsibility of the school committee. So masking in schools, right? We got a lot of emails about those on both sides, and we read them and tried to respond thoughtfully. There are some, I have a friend who has a son at Newton North, and she emailed say, hey, parking is really difficult. Can you guys do something about it? And the answer was, actually, that's not us. Here are people you can talk to, and have you tried calling Amy Winston? That kind of thing, right? But we try to respond to all of those, and then I find myself meeting with people either in person or on Zoom, once or twice a week. And it varies a little bit depending on the topic that's come up. But talking to other families and parents and concerned citizens is very much part of the role.
All right, so I'm going to hand it off to Grace, who's going to ask the next question.
Okay, why did you run for school committee? And I know you guys probably kind of went over this, but when were you elected? How many years or term-wise?
Kind of just to add on to that, your experience on it. I know Toby, you didn't run for a school committee, but just what it's been like to be on it, especially through a more turbulent time. So
I guess I'll start since I have the microphone. So like I said, this is my first year in the school committee, elected last November, took office on January 1st of this year. In terms of why I ran, I think there's sort of two veins of folks who do this. One is, people who are politicians, for lack of a better word. They are, that's in their blood. They want to be in these types of roles. They are, they want to, I don't mean that cynically, they want to be out, they want to be improving their communities, they want to be involved, they want to be active. And then there's those folks who say, look, this isn't in my nature, but I feel really strongly about this. And I'm 100,000% in the second camp. I don't consider myself, other than the fact that I had to have lawn signs and get elected, I don't consider myself a politician in any way, shape, or form. I am a person who would probably be willing to say, I work in institutional investment management professionally. It's a hard job, it's lots of hours. I'd be happy as long as the trains are running on time to let someone else take care of it. But the pandemic and the remote and hybrid schooling, I think, was by and large a mistake. I think when the history books are written, that will be our biggest failing as a country and as a community, putting too much of the burden on the backs of kids. And I took that very seriously. And that, for me, was the absolute sort of straw as why I got involved in this. I spent, as much time as I do on the school committee, I spent just as much time working to restore in-person learning, and I figured I might as well be on the other side of the table, so to speak.
This is my 5th year on the school committee. I've been elected 3 times. You may know we serve for 2-year terms. And so we are elected at large by the entire city every other November. School committee members can serve a maximum of 4 terms or 8 years. You can then take a break and run again. That's unusual for most people to do. I ran originally for the school committee because, quite honestly, I was sort of recruited by a school committee who had served school committee member who had served his 8 years and was trying to get others interested in taking his position. So why I did it, so at the time, my youngest was 3, and there comes a point in time when you have a 3-year-old where you're like, oh, well, this isn't as hard as it was a year ago. I've got free time. And so I think I vastly underestimated the time commitment that being on school committee was, but it was also something I was passionate about. I have 3 kids in NPS, and I'm an enormous believer in public education. I think it is in large part responsible for how I got to where I am. I didn't go to public school in Massachusetts, I'm from Maryland, but nonetheless, having a really incredibly good public school experience, opened so many doors for me, and it's just something I care a lot about. With 3 kids in the schools, it's something I care a lot about. And so it also appeals to the kinds of things I like to do. I like to research, I like to write, I like to investigate policy things, and I also like to communicate about those issues. So when thinking about, oh, what can I do with all this newfound free time, it was something that really appealed to the things that I care about.
So we all had different paths. For me, I for 5 years was co-chair of the CPAC, the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee. So my son has special needs. As I mentioned, he's a junior here, taking both gen ed and special ed classes. And I was pretty involved with the special education community in Newton. We did a lot of work to help parents and families. And then one of our primary responsibilities was advising both NPS and the school committee on issues related to special education. In the course of that, I got to know members of the school committee, like Kathy, and got to know Toby and other senior administrators, and found myself pulled into issues that were broader than special education. So one of those was actually the return to high school, where Toby and I and a number of other parents, teachers, and administrators worked to figure out the hybrid return to high school that actually took place. The best of many bad options, but it did help bring both Newton North and Newton South back into the buildings, and I think that made a big difference. One of the outgoing school committee members reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in running. So similar to Kathy's situation in that way. And having seen what the school committee did up close, I wasn't sure. I had the time commitment for it. I talked to a lot of people. And one of the things that tipped the scales for me was I grew up outside the US. I came to the US as a 17-year-old. I'm a naturalized citizen. When I was naturalized, which was this really nice ceremony at Faneuil Hall, the judge said a couple of things that have stuck with me. And the first was, when you're a citizen, your most important duty is to vote. Like, don't miss an election, you have a voice, people in other countries are dying to have that, and you should vote. And he said the second most important thing you can do is to get involved and run for office. It's never easy, the returns are not monetary. They really are the ability to make a change, have an impact. So that stuck with me, and that was one of the things that had me saying, you know, I think I can make an impact. I think I can do a good job. You have to think that. And so that's what made me run.
My answer is going to be different because I'm not a member of the school committee. I'm not elected. But so when I became assistant superintendent in Newton, I had been a teacher, I'd been a school administrator, I'd been a principal. I had probably been to 2 school committee meetings in the city where I lived ever. And so I came to work here, and my job as an educator was to support schools like Newton North and support the administrators. And they said, oh yeah, and you have to show up every other Monday night for this meeting and talk to this nice group of people about what you're doing. It's like, all right, fine, sounds good. So that's how naive I was at that point, because there's a lot more to it, as we're learning today, right? And so it's interesting thinking about. I think one of the other roles that you guys didn't talk about, just to be explicit, is the school committee is also the boss of the superintendent. So I'm an assistant superintendent. My boss is Dr. Fleischman, to put it bluntly, and Dr. Fleischman's boss is the entire school committee. So he has 9 bosses essentially, or one group. And so it's an opportunity for them to hear directly from him, and then from the people that work for him, like me, about the work that we're doing on their behalf of people in Newton. So I go to the meetings, and there's this added level of transparency to everything I do as an educator in sharing the work we're doing and getting input and direction from the school committee on how to do that work. So that's what the meetings are about to me. And I work with a lot of different school committee members over the last 7 years, and people with a range of different opinions on different topics, and so it's always interesting to see that. I would just say, like, I'm even more of a macro or balcony view of the whole thing. I think the key to everything about this sort of civic engagement process in the school committee is specifically is the level of civility and respect that people have for one another as decisions are being made, as things are being debated. And I so appreciate all the school committee members who are really thoughtful and respectful of the people that they're working with, on one another on the school committee and the staff in the new public schools. And I always really appreciate, they talk about emails and outreach they get from members of the public about different issues. People reach out to other senior staff as well about different issues. And when that communication is really thoughtful and respectful and civil, it makes such a big difference in terms of how it's received and how it can be thoughtful and understand and empathetic towards the different concerns people have. So that's a big part of it, and that's sort of maybe something you think about as a context for all of the details we're talking about too.
Okay. How does the school committee enact change and exercise its powers? And how does the role of each individual member compare and fit into this?
So I think maybe I'll start with, there are, I'd say maybe 5 main responsibilities of the school committee, and the ways in which we enact change are slightly different as to each of those responsibilities. So I think the most directly responsive responsibility of the school committee is to write and approve district-wide policies and procedures. And the way we do that is that we have a policy working group. So we have a set of school committee policies and procedures that they're available on our website. They cover an incredibly broad range of topics. We have a policy working group that periodically will recommend changes to those policies, either because a new issue has arisen, because the law has changed, because the existing policy has been unworkable in some ways, or because some new set of circumstances arises that calls out for a policy. And so we work with the administration, we work with our outside counsel, sometimes our inside counsel. We look at what other school committees across the state have for their policies. We also work with the Mass Association of School Committees, who publishes sort of template policies. And then we propose language which the school committee considers in its open meeting, often suggests changes to that language, and then ultimately we vote on it. So that's sort of one of our responsibilities. Another of our responsibilities is hiring and evaluating the superintendent. And we affect change by when there is an opportunity when we have an opening for superintendent, by considering and sort of all of the things we want in a new superintendent, by evaluating the qualities we want in a candidate, by running a search process, and ultimately by making a hiring decision. Every year, we also do evaluations of the superintendent. There's a rubric that the state asks us to follow, which sort of focuses on the superintendent's goals, the school system's goals, and we compare how the superintendent did on those sort of standard measures against the goals that he set and the goals of the system. Do you want to talk about some of them? Rather than have me talk about all of them, you want to talk about some of the other roles and how we build them?
So I think we all referenced the school budget. In Newton, 60% or 60%, 65% of the city budget is spent on the schools. So we are depending on how you count it, we are a $260 million a year enterprise. And the school committee has the responsibility for oversight over the budget. What are we spending it on? Is it effective? Do we have enough? That was a big and somewhat ongoing concern right now. There's going to be budget impacts, and we're at the forefront of trying to figure out how to work with NPS and try and have them be as least impactful as possible. The budget is a big chunk of the work. Luckily, it doesn't go on all year round. There's a certain budget season, and during that, I would say we spent 30 hours a week easily for several weeks, just focused in meetings and outside of meetings on the budget. If you're not a numbers person, you become one once you join the school committee, because you have to understand how it works and how we can impact it. The other thing I'd say is it's kind of back to Toby's point around we are the board of directors for the school district, and Dr. Fleischman could be seen as the CEO of the school district. We provide guidance and oversight. None of us is going to directly come in and give instructions to any staff member in terms of what to do or what not to do. That's the responsibility of the superintendent. We provide guidance around issues, whether they require a vote or not, what our thinking is, what we think might be good options, and Dr. Fleischman and his senior team then carry those out. So there are a couple of things left. Collective bargaining, I can cover quickly. There are three major unions that serve Newton Public Schools. The largest one is the one for educators. There's also a separate one for custodial staff and one for educational secretaries. We sit on the other side of the table for those unions when new contracts are being negotiated. So we have them actually coming up next year. The process, seen from the outside, can be painful. When I see it next year from the inside, it'll probably be even more painful. It's this balance between trying to reward educators for the work that they do, which is incredible, especially in Newton, and trying to fit it within a budget that is constrained by many things, especially recently what's happening in terms of revenues to the city from the pandemic. Right? The city is making less money. There are fewer meals, there are fewer hotel rooms being used, there are fewer parking tickets. All of that means the city has less money, and in the long term, we expect everything should spring back, but we're not there yet. So certainly a number of things around collective bargaining that are going to make it exceptionally challenging. But again, as representatives of the city and the citizens, we have to make sure that whatever comes out of it is fair and makes sense. Fair to the educators, fair to the citizens of Newton, and has the best outcomes for students.
Yeah, so like the question, the B side I think I can most add is just on that concept of enacting change, which, public education as a whole is a pretty slow-moving ship. And, in terms of thinking, like, our ability as a board of directors has been kind of alluded to, is generally speaking, we're not supposed to make big, rapid, radical change. That's very disruptive to people like Toby's lives. If we were to come in and 180 policies, and be switching back and forth of we're going to do A, no, we're going to do B, that would be a really disruptive way for us to conduct our business. So, the ability to enact change, is sort of most acute at the educator level, where a teacher may say, hey, they're going to change something they do in how they're approaching some subject matter or whatever, and it gets more difficult as you move up. Toby can enact more rapid change than we can. Just, he has that ability and authority. He doesn't, have to have a public vote with 9 other people. He will meet with his other administrators, and they can more rapidly do things. So it's much more a bit of a nudging process in terms of enacting change from the school committee level, where you say, maybe this policy isn't all that effective. It's not doing what we intended it to do. Maybe we need to shift gears a little bit and move this way. And that's, but these are really big issues and big picture things. So they matter. It's just, it's not like you see this, light switch on and off kind of concept in terms of enacting change.
All right. thank you. We have just like a question for Toby, since it kind of didn't make it to you. So I know that you don't vote because you're not really like a school committee member. So like, how do you kind of like bring items onto the agenda and kind of like help enact change as well?
Yeah, so the agenda at the school committee meetings is set by the school committee leadership together with the superintendent, I think is an accurate way to say that. So which topics are going to be on there. So some of the agenda items on the school committee meeting are things that they're going to discuss and then vote on and make a decision. So there might be a proposal to change this policy about how we handle certain issues, and they'll talk about it, hear a proposal for what it should be changed to, and then later, like a next meeting, as Reggie said, vote on that. Other agenda items are just updates on things that are happening in the schools, so that the school committee can be informed at a deeper level, and then the public too, through a presentation, and ask questions that might then feed into changing a policy or adding more money in a certain area of the budget, or any number of the different things that are here, or result in a different evaluation of the superintendent, for example. So the agenda and what topics are going to be on a school committee meeting is set by this, again, the school committee leadership and the superintendent. But then as a staff member and as the person who helps present on whatever's on the agenda of the school committee, I have a ton of influence on that. And I actually get to do a lot, almost more than what the school committee does. So oftentimes, I'm the one working with other people and taking input that's proposing something to the school committee for them to consider. So if we don't like how the policy the way that Newton stands against, say, how discrimination in the schools and how we handle it when it happens, we sit down as a leadership team, not the school committee members, and we might talk to some school committee members, we talk to students, talk to staff, talk to parents, and come up, hey, here's a new way we can handle it. Let's present this when that item's on the agenda next month. And then we present it to the school committee and say, here's how we think we should change the policy so that we can handle discrimination in the schools better. And then, so we present that to them, and then the discussion is about the presentation that the staff has made, and the school committee asks great questions, might make suggestions, might request something be changed, might say, that's a terrible idea, go back to the drawing board, but then the staff goes back to the drawing board and draws something new. So we have a ton of impact on the details of how things gets handled once they're on the agenda and once we're asked to present on something or make a proposal or share something. A lot of the time we're just presenting the work that we're doing. So, Dr. Turner and Ms. Strauss, who's a principal of Newton South, and I, and as well as some other high school educators, are going to come and present at an upcoming school committee meeting on how high school is going this year, and what the new schedule and the new start times have meant, what are the good things about that, what are the things that we're struggling with, and just kind of inform the school committee on all of the details of that. And they're obviously hearing from constituents, from their own family members, from their neighbors, and lots of other people about that too. But that's some examples. Hope that answers the question.
And I'm handing it off to Rachel.
All right, so the next question is, how does all of your work sort of impact students? And if you guys have any examples of recent things that have impacted students, feel free to share.
So I have the quick and easy answer. In the past few months, one of the question that has most impacted students was around the mask mandate. And that we have an excellent medical advisory group supporting Dr. Fleischman. We take input from that group. Dr. Fleischman and Toby and others put together a recommendation for what to do around masking. We had to have that discussion, and as I mentioned, we had a lot of outreach from families, from administrators, staff members, on both sides of whether masking should be mandatory or not. And that was a decision made by the school committee. And I know it didn't necessarily have an immediate impact in the sense of it was kept very much optional. It's whatever you choose to do is absolutely fine, and there was a message for that had to be developed by the school district to be very clear, not just at the high school level, but all the way to preschool, to say that whatever decision you make around masking is okay. It's something that is between you and your family, and is completely acceptable, whatever it is. But that was something we had to vote on, right? That had more immediate impact than a lot of other things, but if you think about some of the questions or the presentations we've had, we had a DEI update on Monday, and the team talked about how they've been working with educators across the district, but certainly including Newton North, around supporting students of color, supporting minority groups, supporting transgender students. We asked questions about what they're doing. Are they doing enough? What are they planning to do next year? I think some of these things have an impact in a couple of ways. One is around the policies, which can take a little time, but also the tone. Like, what kinds of questions are we asking? In what way are we asking them? Like, do we as individual members of the school committee believe in certain what's a good word to use here? Values. Thank you. She's an attorney, I'm an engineer, so Kathy's much better at this. Do we share those values, and also how to implement them? That's usually the toughest part. Do we all believe in diversity? I would hope so. How does that manifest itself in real life for all of you and for students across the district? I think that's where it gets tougher. So, again, there are a lot of policy questions that take a little time to land, but our goal, if I try to put it really simply, is to empower the success of Newton Public Schools teachers and administrators so that students get the best possible education. That's the goal, and we have to work to do that, and that factors into everything we do, whether it's a decision that has an immediate impact in some ways, like a mask mandate decision, or whether it's a policy decision that'll roll out over a few years.
I can just offer another example of a policy decision the school committee made that had an enormous impact on all of you, and that's about this time last year, the school committee voted to change the high school schedule and start time. And so that's a decision that the school committee made. School committee members for about 10 years were working on that project and considered a whole variety of options, a whole variety of factors, in addition to starting times. There was a schedule redesign process that changed both the number and the timing of the blocks. And those are efforts that were led by the administration, but ultimately the decision about whether to implement those changes was a school committee decision.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'll add is the two examples I brought up were the two that certainly came to mind in terms of like the immediate student impact that you felt this as a student, like, that was the sort of light switch type thing. That's rare. Most of the decisions we make and the policies we enact, again, they aren't such stark changes that you are like, wow, I can really feel that the school committee, altered that policy. Ooh, this is, that's not the way it works. But the biggest decision we'll have over the next year, without question, and what is the our relevant business right now is hiring a new superintendent, and that will have a huge impact on all of you. I mean, the person that we put in that seat and what we seek for and how we seek to express those values that Rajiv was referring to is, I mean, there isn't a more consequential decision we can make that would impact you, but that's going to be because of the decisions that superintendent and the assistant superintendents put forth based on our policies. It's not going to be, again, us sort of flipping the light switch.
I don't have to answer every question. But I think to build on what you said, Chris, I think that's a great one. So, how does what they do impact students, right? So the best way to impact students is to have really good teachers in your classes, right? You guys are here, some of you are here with your teachers, which is perfect. But we have good teachers in Newton want to work here and want to stay here because they have strong school leaders who make the school run really well, work well, and support the staff and help them grow. And to have good school leaders, you need to have a good superintendent, right, who understands and leads well and gets people the resources they need and supports them, has clear vision and policy. So that's sort of the impact of hiring that superintendent and getting the right person that's gonna take us in the right direction, but be good at their job, be good at management, be good at leadership, be good at supporting people and helping people grow, is how you guys end up having really strong teachers and well-taught classes, and then a positive experience in school. So in that way, it directly impacts you, but you don't see it as, again, that switch on and off. And so many things are like that, right? It's like you might approve some money to be spent on a new boiler for Newton North. Who cares what's in the room? But like when you're sitting in class and it's too cold, or the air conditioning's broken, or whatever, because there's not enough money on maintenance, it impacts you directly. So there's lots of things like that where it's like, you're gonna not see a vote in something in the school committee that you feel the next day, but it impacts how good your school experience is.
It's probably better you don't even know we exist. That's when you know we exist and it's usually not good. Exactly, like a referee.
All right, so the next question is, how can students impact the decisions of the school committee, and how can we bring issues to the table?
So I would say, number one, students do impact the decisions of the school committee, and the absolute best way you can do that, in my opinion, is, we've talked a lot about how we communicate with our constituents and the thousands of emails we get and all that kind of stuff. And a couple of people said it, there are those communications you get, whether it's email or someone gives you a phone call, that are such a personal story, and they're respectful, and they're well thought out, and those are really, really impactful. And, through the course of, my 5 months of doing this, on, pretty much every major issue that's come before us, I have had some sort of communication with some student that has really made me think hard, think differently. We heard just this past week from a ton of students at Newton South about the Jazz Combo program. And some of those, personal stories are really impactful in seeing how, like, I'm not a musician, I'm as unmusical, I zero musical ability whatsoever. Never have, never will. But to hear some of these stories about how this impacted some of these kids' lives, and it's really, really compelling. And I think it's being looked at. I won't put Toby on the spot here, but those are the things that really matter. They really do move the needle. If you think, standing up there, we have our 3-minute public comment period, and we hear from students a lot during that. And some of those are really compelling. And it's hard because you feel like you're talking into this void, especially in the Zoom world of, like, you're staring at the screen and you talk for 3 minutes and it goes off into the ether, and did anyone hear me? I can assure you there are people who hear you. We do take those things to heart. And I put the student experience, you are our first constituents. We have the community and taxpayers, and we represent them. We have our staff and our educators, and they are our stakeholders in this, but you are really our constituents. The students are the reason we do this. And from that perspective, hearing the impact of the students is sort of the most primary source of information we can get. So I would encourage all of you to be in contact with us. Our emails and phone numbers are all publicly on the Newton School Committee website. I know, I'm pretty sure I speak for all of us when I say we want to hear from you. You do a good job of keeping the administration honest, so,
So I'll also add that we have student school committee members, including 2 of our moderators. And so our student members attend our meetings, can ask questions at our meetings, just like any of us can. while our student members don't get a vote on questions on which we vote, their input on the topics that we discuss, particularly the ones that are most related to high school students' experience, are incredibly valuable and they're really important to the way we think about issues, because our student members have a set of experiences with both how we operate as a group and the kinds of policy issues we're facing, that they can say, hey, I understand that you did this in the past, think about it differently, think about it this way. And through the questions that you ask, both in our meetings and in more personal one-on-one conversations with us, can really shape the way we think about things and the issues we pass off to the administrators that we deal with in developing both our agendas and our responses to ongoing concerns. And so to the extent you as a student body funnel your issues and concerns to your student school committee members and they communicate with us, that's another way we get student input and hear student voice.
I think Chris and Kathy dealt with the broad thinking really well. So let me give a couple of tactical ideas. We want to hear from you, and your voice matters. A form email is not going to have that impact, as Chris mentioned, as we've talked about before. But get in touch. Email is generally better than calling or texting, simply because it's there, we can get to it, we all have jobs, but we will get back to you. It's also really important, if possible, to talk about issues that affect multiple groups or people, right? And this is true also for when we hear from parents. If I get an email saying, my child, such and such, I will absolutely respond and reach out. It's much more powerful if it's the 30 kids in my son's math class had this issue. Like, we know it's more systemic. It's something where I can email Toby or one of the other senior administrators and say, hey, I just heard that there is a broader issue that may require looking into. So, if there's something along those lines and there are multiple students who are impacted or who want to see things work differently, that's more powerful. Like, let us know that it's not just you, that it's multiple people, there's an impact, things could be done better, and that certainly matters.
I actually have a good example of effective advocacy that actually some of you could have been involved in, but if you went to 8th grade in the Newton Public Schools, you probably did either Generation Citizen or a Civic Action Project. About 5 or 6 years ago, there was a group, one of the groups in the 8th grade, they did an Action Civics project on school safety and emergency response. And they did a whole investigation around different kinds of responses to active shooter events. Unfortunately, we're talking about that today. We just had a moment of silence. But that was a group of students that their final project, they actually came and presented to me and other members of the public school safety team that are in charge of a lot of those emergency procedures, and made a really strong case why it was important to improve what at the time we just had, much more basic safety responses. And hearing their voices and hearing them articulate what they needed to feel safe in school, you reminding us of the research that we knew, but hearing it again in the light of the context of the tragic increase in violent incidents in the school. 3 years ago, we totally revamped all of our emergency response procedures. So that was even a way that students were involved and students advocated for change. It had nothing to do with the school committee, because again, the school committee doesn't do a lot in this area. It's more detailed than they would do. We have policies likely to say there should be an emergency response protocol, but it's actually the school administrators and the district leaders that make that. So it was hearing the voices. And I'll go back just to my advice from before, which is that when you're advocating for something, whether you're writing an email or you're coming to public comment at a school committee meeting, or you're getting a bunch of other classmates and people to reach out to elected officials, or even just Dr. Turner or Ms. Winston or people in the school about something you want to see change. Start by using a really positive tone and assuming best intent. I think I get a lot of correspondence from people sometimes, which assumes, let's say,
decreasing, why did we get rid of the jazz combo at Newton South? You must not believe in music education. You don't care about our students, musical education. Like, wait a minute, I'm an educator, of course I care about it. Why would you think that, right? But other people have started that conversation with, look, I know the budget was really tough this year and you probably had to make some tough choices, but I think you made a mistake and here's why. That's a very different kind of communication and it's way more effective, I have to say, in getting your point across I assume for school committee members, anybody else. So the more you start those conversations by thinking about a really thoughtful and respectful tone and assuming best intentions, you're far more likely to impact people's actions at any level. Again, from asking your teacher to change what day the homework is due to asking the school committee to change a district-wide policy. I think that's always good advice from where I sit.
Please, if I could for just 1 second. That's excellent advice. You don't see it being followed by parents necessarily either. So we'll get a lot of very angry emails. You guys don't know what you're doing. You don't care about our students. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't care. So the positive tone goes a very long way. The other thing for the teachers in the room, we hear from teachers when we talk to teachers. I know there are restrictions around anything around collective bargaining, but I've talked to a number of teachers from all levels of the school district. And please reach out if there are things you think we can help with, you want to express your opinion on something. You don't have to live in Newton, you are a constituent, just by being a teacher or administrator. So I don't think we hear enough from teachers sometimes, and that would be really good.
All right, so finally, I know that there is some confusion, I bet among the student body, but also among just like citizens in general about the difference between city council and school committee. So how do the two bodies compare to each other, and how are they similar but also different?
So looking at the screen, how does the school committee compare to the city council? The short answer, we're much better. Right? There's no question. So the longer and more serious answer, we are both elected bodies. And the way things work in Newton, our responsibility is just NPS, which doesn't mean that we as citizens don't care about the many issues that come up in front of the city council. We do. The city council works more broadly, and they're responsible for everything except NPS. And the intersection point between us and them is the school's budget, which the mayor proposes, which we debate and vote on, and which they then have to approve. So that's, in many ways, the single intersection point between the two groups. The other thing is we know each other. We talk to each other. Parents and students will bring up concerns also to their city council members. And we'll hear from them with hey, I heard this from someone in my neighborhood, and what's happening with the schools regarding this particular topic. So I think in general there's a good relationship between the two groups, but we do cover different things. The point of intersection, especially this year, is interesting because we are trying to get more funding for the school budget. And at a certain point we handed the budget off. The city council is continuing to have that discussion, which is fantastic, and which hopefully will result in some additional funding, which may address some of the cuts that are likely to take place next year. So
I think Rajiv covered it. Let's see, what can I add? We are elected on the same cycles. So we as school committee members frequently interact with our city council counterparts when it comes to election season. Speaking of, let's see, we follow the same general rules. They are bound by open open meeting law as we are. We have public meetings like theirs. Theirs tend to be much longer public meetings. I guess we're a much smaller body. There are 8 ward assigned members of the school committee, and the mayor is our 9th member, as opposed to having 24 city councilors. So we tend to be a more collegial group. But a lot of school committee members, a lot of city councilors were once on the school committee. So they have both perspectives. City councilors do not have term limits, unlike school committee members. So they also tend to serve for longer periods of time. And you really covered all of it, so do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I guess I'll give you my view on maybe some of the sort of inside baseball in the world of Newton politics that I've come to appreciate over the last couple of years in thinking about this. You know, Kathy made the point that, you know, we're a little more collegial, and I guess that's probably true. You know, it's there is an interesting dynamic, I feel, and I don't know, maybe Mark will say differently. I'll introduce this topic. In the city council, where I believe there's some universe of city council, this is just my personal view, everybody kind of wants the same end goal. You know, there's certainly a shared core of common values, I'd say, amongst elected representatives in Newton. I think almost every elected representative in Newton is from one political party or independent, if I'm not corrected. But there's a dynamic of people who say, you know, we need to really do our part to solve the big and grand problems of the world. And there's, I think, some people who focus a little more on, we need to solve, you know, these very acute, distinct problems in Newton, or come to the solutions on, you know, again, sort of making sure the trains run on time. And that's sort of from my perspective, I don't know if you guys disagree, that's sort of the political divide I see amongst the elected officials in Newton. And I think that probably comes out a little bit more on the city council side than it does on the school committee side. We have it easy. We're here for you. Like, we have one charge. And it makes life a little bit easier for us to be, you know, sort of all pulling the same direction.
All right, so now we're going to move into the Q&A portion. We have the QR code where you can submit your questions, but I think we already have some, so we're going to get started with them.
I think most of them were answered. Someone asked, do you have any office hours, and how do we interact with each of you outside of this event? And you said basically like email. Is there anything else like you want to add to that?
We do have office hours on occasion. We do have office hours on occasion. We announce those publicly on our website. It gets sent out in the district newsletters, all that kind of stuff. We just had one, our most recent one was around the budget. And, you know, I'm guessing we probably won't have another one this academic year, but probably, you know, in the fall. But yeah, always, as I said, by email is the easiest way to get in touch with any of us.
Okay, we might not have any other questions currently. Okay, does Olivia have a question? Okay.
My question was, for any of you who served before COVID, or any for anyone now who's going after COVID, and because I think you all lived in Newton beforehand, like, how is the school committee dealings been like before and after COVID, and like how has COVID affected and Toby, how has COVID affected how you guys all do your jobs and how discussion with constituents goes?
Well, it's certainly created a lot of issues to focus on, but I'm going to give it to Kathy because she was the only one of us, of the school committee folks who was here pre-COVID.
So I was on the school committee for 2 years before COVID happened, and then the last 3 have been COVID times. So, I mean, the immediate and sort of concrete change is our meetings have become virtual. And there are a lot of pluses and minuses to that. On the positive side, far more people attend our virtual meetings than ever attended our in-person meetings. And so I think there's a much broader section of the community that hears and understands what we do sort of on a regular meeting level basis. The downside to not having in-person meetings is that there's a huge amount of opportunity for casual conversation that is really informative and productive, where you have the opportunity to be in the room with somebody and you can say, hey, I've got a question, or hey, I wanted to raise something with you that there's an impediment to doing that when you have to make an appointment to see somebody or reach out either by email or by calling somebody. You lose sort of a level of personal dialogue and personal connection that I think really is a loss. It feels like a loss for me because the sort of tenor of your interpersonal relationships changes. And I think what I would say about being on the school committee during what I would call the more acute phase of the COVID crisis was that everything became much more of an emergency. And COVID took over what I would consider to sort of have been our ordinary program of work, such that lots of ongoing work got stopped, basically for resources. Not so much financial, but people's time is the big resource in a school district. And because COVID was so immediate and all-encompassing and all-consuming, it stopped a lot of other projects and progress in a lot of other areas. And I guess the other thing I would say is it had a very detrimental impact on the tone of the communications. Being a school committee member over I would say the 2020 to 2021 school year was really hard because lots of people were very anxious and very upset, and completely understandably, but the number of emails I got and the number of phone calls I got that started with the assumption that I was incompetent and evil together, it's demoralizing when I do this because I care so much about all of your experience and the system as a whole. And so it's hard. Part of your job as a public official is to sort of put that aside and to some extent ignore the tone and deal with the substance. But that gets to be challenging. Anybody else?
So I think we're almost at the end of our time, but my question, like, if you want to each give like a brief answer, is like, what's the most rewarding part of working on the school committee?
And for me personally, the most rewarding part is the ability to make a difference. Right? It may be something that takes place or gets rolled out over multiple years, maybe something that happens sooner. But hearing the opinions of the other members of the school committee is incredibly helpful. We have quite a diversity in terms of our backgrounds, our experiences, what we bring to the table. So we're not at all this homogenous group of people, and I think that makes it more valuable. And that the decisions we make have an impact, and I would like to believe a positive impact. And being able to influence that, even in the past 4.5 months, already has felt very real.
Yeah, I mean, tying in with what I said earlier about how, it's a slow-moving ship and change is kind of very incremental. And in fact, some of that change is around the process and how the committee runs and not just the policies of the district. It's sort of, you have to take the small wins as your rewards. And, there is a lot to take out of that though, when, you were able to help help move the ball forward on an issue that people care about, that you were able to provide, you know, the right kind of resources to a family that was having some kind of issue, and you know, you feel the gratitude of, you know, parents stress about their kids' education. There's no question about that. And to be able, and you know, kids stress about their own education, and to be able to, you know, provide some element of help and relief and know that it's making a difference for that individual is the little wins that you have to take, because the big wins, you know, don't come easy.
I don't know that I have much to add. I think it's rewarding. I think the thing maybe that I see as one of the most rewarding things is to see our high schoolers who have been students in the Newton Public Schools for years and see that by the end of their experience, all of the really amazing things they achieve. And I'm constantly blown away by the thoughtfulness and the accomplishments and just the amazing people that NPS turns out. And that's not all NPS, it's your families, it's your communities, it's you. But NPS helps, and like when I see what you guys do, I feel like that's the most rewarding part.
Thank you so much for
convince yourself that the pressure at any given depth, in terms of intensity of the liquid, is fine.